Okay, bingos and bongos, it's been another year, and there's no debating it. Big year, so much music, let's get to work. All the usual footnotes about the silliness of list making and ranking, and the impossibility of trying to keep up with new music, etc. apply. So, as is now tradition, first, the non-metal stuff, which I'm especially bad at keeping up with, so, as always, hit me with whatever I missed. Huge year for this. Starting from the most well-known, we have Cowboy Carter, which is an absolute gem. I first heard the singles and was like, what? This isn't that good. But it turns out the singles are the worst songs on the album, in my opinion. And it is a huge album with a ton of really quality bops, some weird kind of experimental stuff, some self-conscious genre deconstruction, and Beyonce is a national treasure. My favorite moment is probably the weird chromatic stuff on My Rose, but there's a ton to love on this album. Next, I think we can all agree it was so fun to see Kendrick go full sicko mode in the spring and then follow it up with a surprise album just a few weeks ago. I think it's rare that an established artist backtracks on the mellowing out process that seems to be inevitable when you get older and get more experience. And to hear Kendrick rap when he's pissed off is a gift. I'm especially interested in hearing what hip-hop I missed this year, because I was definitely only a sometimes tourist in this area this year. Childish Gambino's new and last album is really good, and that show was pretty cool. This is the first of many live clips I'm going to show. I saw a ton of really great shows this year, including the Animals as Leaders 10-year anniversary Joy of Motion show. The Hiatus Coyote record was catchy and quirky and unbelievably groovy once again. I'm especially psyched that they finally released Cinnamon Temple, which is the studio version of their most metal song, which they've been playing live for a while. You metal nerds are probably hip to the Tigran album, which is enormous and conceptual, but my personal favorite parts are those trademark grooves that are just like, what on earth is going on? The Extra Life album is weird and cool and not really metal, even if the spirit of it is definitely metal, and seeing Charlie and Co. live was probably the best show I went to this year. I also had a nice chat with him on his channel. I'll link that in the description in case you missed it. Dan Weiss's album, Even Oz, is hip. He's always just bending time like it's his own personal rubber band or something. Lamniform's album is pretty cool in the category of stuff that's not metal, but is made by someone who's been deep into the metal sphere. Like a flash from Ian Corey, who interviewed me a while ago for his podcast, is behind this album, and he was on a roundtable for Stereo Gum with me that I will mention 2 more times during this video. but that's also linked in the description. And finally, for non-metal stuff, I've been pretty deep into the extruded non-locality immersion, and you should probably get into that too. RIP Metagroth. And then the 2024 Slept On Award for an album that didn't come out this year, but I only fully appreciated this year. Maybe not a surprise, but this year's winner is Palimpsest by Protest the Hero, an album I did a video about a few months ago, and I started listening to a little last year, but I listened to it obsessively this year. Gardenias is truly one of the best short prog metal songs I've ever heard, and the whole thing is just pure energy, all gas and no breaks. My favorite type of album. I think I slept on it because on paper it is not my thing at all. As I said in my video about it, this prog metal spirit Stallion of the Cimarron Lin-Manuel Miranda core concept album about the Wild West, written by Canadians, has no right to be as good as it is. But here we are. It was probably my most listened to album of the year, and I think it's really cool when a band that wrote one of my favorite albums of whatever year Fortress came out also wrote my most listened to album from this year, or one of my most listened to albums. And the final preliminary category is metal that did come out this year, but is excluded from the main list for whatever reason. One of these is the re-recorded re-release of the still mind-blowing Cognitive Dissonance EP by Anomalous, which came out right at the beginning of the year. So it's not really new music, but this re-recording brings this insane piece of music to life again for me, and you really ought to check it out. The other item in this category is some of my own music, the self-titled debut EP from Ailan Entity. I joined this band after they'd written these songs, but I was so lucky to join a band of such chill dudes who write such interesting, crushing riffs. If you aim for Suffocation, Defeated Sanity, and Wormed, you'll land among the stars, as I always say. It was a whole process recording this and getting it mixed and mastered and everything. We went out and spent a whole day in a boiling hot shed in Long Island last year to get most of the tracks down.
Someone arrest this man. Arrest him.
And then there's a whole bunch of stuff, but it turned out pretty sweet, and we are hard at work getting ready for live shows and writing the full length. Here's maybe my favorite riff on the EP. Okay, here we go. It is time for the main list. Here are my top 24 metal albums from 2024. Big year for bands I love that have been dormant for a while coming back to life, a few sick debuts, and one or two other things that don't fit into those categories. But all of it is 100% high quality grade A, high quality USDA, high quality certified NASA approved, IRS audited, recommended by 95% of dentists and orthodontists metal. At number 24, I've got one of the most bizarre metal albums I've heard in a long time, a Between the Buried and Me style prog concept album about a failed slave insurrection in Virginia. Southampton Insurrection by Fire at the Plantation House takes the density and thematic consistency that I love from Between the Buried and Me and fleshes it out with some really cool riffs and a main theme that's been stuck in my head since I first heard it. Here's some of that theme at the beginning of the album. And not to spoil it, but a little bit of where it comes back at the very end. And some of that blessed heavy riffing.
Blood of the men, blood of the women, blood of the children, blood of the masters, that's blood my hands. Callous but golden, those demons, the pledge will break their chains. Kill them before they wake.
At number 23, I move from probably the least well-known thing on this list to the most well-known, with Knocked Loose's new full-length, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to. I love Knocked Loose, you love Knocked Loose, everyone loves Knocked Loose. Basically, if you can pull off a reggaeton breakdown with Poppy and play it on Jimmy Kimmel and probably give a ton of preteens their metal awakening, you've earned your spot on this list.
Suffocate!
And for any of you saying that you don't like the vocals, grow up. You sound like people who don't listen to metal saying, I like everything except I just can't deal with the harsh vocal. I can't deal with the growling. The vocals are sick, and so are the riffs. At 22, I have another slightly deeper cut, the new Exist album. Now, I know you're thinking that you don't want to listen to a prog metal album that's kind of about how bad the digital world is, because that sounds like something that might be a little too on the nose. And maybe it is, but the riffs are high quality, which is all any of us really care about. And it's why I got into them in the first place after seeing them open for Gorguts. I think it was Gorguts a long time ago. At 21, I've got one of the slowest things on this list, the new Spectral Voice album. Lots of metal bands have spectral in the name, lore, voice, wound, what have you. None of them are actually spectralists, sadly, but this album is expectrally good. Death Doom done the way the Lord intended, and they put on a hell of a live show too. I also saw them this year. Of these lists that I do, the more I think in terms of kind of certain categories. And one of the biggest categories to fill for me in any year of listening is dissonant death metal that also hits hard. And the band that basically invented that category for me was Replicant. And what do you know? The heavyweight champs are back to renew my membership to Beat Downtown. Infinite Mortality is full of the types of breakdowns that make me say, oh my. Like this one from the title track, and it is number 20 on my list. Another blossoming category for me is music that feels like a fire hose, which was kind of invented by Serpent colum. This is one of those bands slash guys who's pretty much invented his own very distinct style. It's relentless and hypnotic, it's manic and abrasive, and it feels like being thrown around by frigid whitewater rapids for half an hour straight. Here's one of my favorite of his hypnotic song-ending riffs from Tassel of Ares, which is my number 19 album. At 18, I have probably the shortest project on this list, the debut EP from Annex Void. This group loves Meshuggah, they love The Contortionist, they love Loathe, but they don't loathe love. And they don't take it easy when they write their riffs, which keeps it interesting for nerds like me. Here's one of my favorite spiky joints from this gem. At 17, I have a long-awaited follow-up album from one of my all-time favorite niche early 2000s metal bands. I told you I'd have a few of these bands that have been gone for a while resurfacing this year. Orgone put out one of my favorite EPs of all time, like truly up there with I and Chaining the Catacon, and then a full length, and then nothing for like a decade. Pleroma feels like it has all of the pent-up ideas from this time in one captivating, sprawling album. You will not be able to predict all the places this album goes, so don't even try. But it's enough for me that one of the places they go is their signature high velocity, high density, jumping all over the fretboard and from high strings to low strings, can't tell where or if anything repeats, high thrill riff rides. At 16, that's Lord dying to you. and their album Clandestine Transcendence. This is like dark psychedelic sludge metal about dying, but it's also weird and proggy, like pretty much everything on this list. And in particular, I really like this stop time accent bit from the beginning of A Bond Broken by Death. At 15, I have probably the angriest album on this list, Thou's Umbilical. I know they hate it when nerds like their music or something. I don't know, I saw an interview this year. And this album was supposed to be a return to their like raw punk aggression. But they still have just enough little clever things thrown into these kind of loose, hateful riffs to make it feel like the whole world is falling on your head. Like, for example, when they switch where the downbeat is in this main riff from the start to the end of the first track. I listened to this album a ton while I was raging at the many ways in which a grad program makes it clear that they don't care about you anymore after you finish your degree. Alright, this one goes out to all of you who are low-key trying to go to war with the demons of Mazandaran. At number 14, I have Loen's new album, which just might change your mind. There's always an album that slips its way onto the list at the last second, not necessarily because it comes out at the end of the year, but because I only listen to it at the end of the year. And this year, Loen is that band that sneaks in at the last second. What can I say? These sunny, proggy, sludgy riffs stole my heart. Especially in a year where a lot of my favorite albums are not the type of thing I'm going to listen to that often because they're such intense artistic statements or because I associate them really strongly with a specific big life change. This is a much needed, supremely spinnable, fun and original slab of metal. Bonus points for top 3 favorite album art of the year. Speaking of intense artistic statements, the Hoplight's album, I don't know how to say that. I don't know like what's going on with any of the written stuff in this whole thing, is truly unhinged, and that is my number 13. Everything from the way the metal jumps in on a weird offbeat during the chant at the start of the first track, to the extended techniques on the saxophones all the way through, to the frantic Serpent column-y riffs is the work of someone who has looked a little too deep into music's dark abyss. And if you know anything about me, you know that's exactly what I want to listen to. At 12, I have one of those rare albums that doesn't really fit an existing mold, but it's definitely death metal, it's definitely twisty and experimental and forward-thinking, and it's definitely very hard-hitting. The Asadis album, Eden Trough, I think took everyone by surprise for good reason. This was definitely the album that was most recommended to me by fellow nerds. The super gated, too fast breakdown riffs in Libertine Captor are breathtaking, and the whole thing has a really nice pacing and shape, and you have to listen to it, otherwise you're not cool anymore. If indeed you ever were. A lot of the rest of the lists, I kind of think of things in pairs, and at 11 I have, in some ways, a similar album to this Asadis album, the new Convulsing album. I had the honor of being on a roundtable discussion about emotionally extreme metal, Remember, I mentioned that a few minutes ago. And this roundtable featured not only Ian, but also Brendan, the guy behind Convulsing. And it was eye-opening to hear some of how he's thinking about writing metal that's this technical and also this emotionally raw. From a nerd perspective, I like this crazy collapsing riff at the end of Inner Oceans, and a lot of other sick riffs on this. But from a growing up human perspective, this album affirms that it's possible and cool to express emotions other than the bad ones on a metal album. Okay, top 10 time. At 10, I have the follow-up album from Scarcity, which is also top 3 album covers of the year, and also one of the deepest albums of the year. This slow-moving, layered, microtonal car horn core black metal paints with new colors compared to the first album. Doug sounds terrifying, and it fits perfectly with rainless New York City this summer and fall. At number 9, I have Sumx's new album, The Healer. Somehow the spacey parts keep getting spacier, and the riffy parts just keep getting riffier, and somewhere in all of this is some of the deepest, heaviest metal coming out of the Metal Factory. Seeing Sumx live is one of the most important things you can do, and everyone should be doing it as often as possible. At 8, I will not sugarcoat it. I've got some Dissonant. Congelation by Congelation is sure skronky, but it's also written by someone who has a deep understanding of harmony, so it's not just minor seconds and tritones, which I really appreciate in this kind of, I'll say it, this kind of saturated corner of death metal. This album really stands out. Seeing them live with Christian, the drummer from Florid Exodus, was another highlight in a year full of killer live shows. At 7, look, it's Wormed. There's not much to say. These guys cornered the market on what robotic brutality can sound like, and it's been a while, but they're still camping on that corner. One of my first videos on this channel was about how they have this one riff that feels like a portal into another dimension, and basically all their riffs feel like that. This is one of the logical conclusions to which death metal can be taken, and in a normal year, this would have been my favorite album of the year. But life goes on because the other pinnacle of brutal death, Defeated Sanity, also released an album this year, and I'm putting it at 6, although really this is kind of a pair, like, you know, Worm Defeated Sanity, Scarcity, and Sumx, Asadis, Convulsing. The order doesn't really matter. It's really, these two albums are yin and yang. While Wormed is tight and inhuman, Defeated Sanity is loose and organic and nasty. They're both incalculably heavy and incomprehensibly brutal, but Defeated Sanity writes riffs that are so clever, they circle back around to being stupid, and then they throw Lil Gruber on top of it all, and you've got some of my favorite death metal ever. Top 5, here we come. As usual, the order of these top 5, and really this whole list, is pretty interchangeable. As we've seen, this has been a big year for bands I love coming back with new albums after long breaks, and at 5 I have yet another of these with the new Immortal Bird album. When they really get going, they get into this kind of out of genre, super precise, slippery splash zone. This album definitely has more of the caustic, unfiltered punk aggression that they came up on, but also feels like a well-oiled, vicious machine full of gnashing teeth. And, final mention of that roundtable, Ray from Immortal Bird was on the roundtable talking about her new project, Wretched Blessing, which also released a sick EP this year, so even more reason to check this album out, the roundtable and the Wretched Blessing EP. Sometimes in this world, the hype is correct, and that is the case for my number 4, Blood Incantations Absolute Elsewhere. This album has been high on like every list I've seen, including on lists from people who don't know much about metal. And yes, the Pink Floyd stuff is good on this album. But the thing is, they're still writing some of the killingest death metal riffs around, and that's what it's all about, really. Here's that one part everyone loves, which I also love.
The voices call your name, screaming so loud in the dark.
And then here's one of my favorite riffs of the album from the start of the Stargate Tablet 3. At 3 on my list, you thought it was the old heaven? Nah, it's the new heaven. This album is an absolute monster, from the twisty, skronky title track to the concrete riffs of Concrete Cliffs. Interarmor are another of these bands that is definitely metal, but they mostly just sound like themselves. Yeah, there's some sludge, there's some death metal, heck on this one there's some gothic darkwave and some folk, but it's so much more than the sum of its parts. It's its own heavy thing. And boy oh boy is it heavy. My favorite track might be Desolation's Harp, with its fragmented, splintered tonal harmony shining through like reflections off of shattered stained glass. I've mentioned a few times that this is a year of returns after long hiatuses, and none of these was bigger for me than that of Ingurgitating Oblivion. Ontology of Naught is everything I could have hoped for from this return. It's a deeply strange album with a very specific vibe, but for whatever reason this exact vibe is like exactly what I want out of my deeply strange death metal. The album is meticulously crafted, which I think has a lot to do with it. There's just like so much attention to detail, and there are a million different guest musicians, including a vibraphonist, which really I think every death metal should have some vibraphone as far as I'm concerned. And Lil Gruber, who actually is on 2 of the albums for this list, he plays drums, and man, he just goes nuts on this thing. And the whole thing is sprawling and shadowy, and most importantly, it's heavy as heck just as often as it is eerie and unsettling. And I think really also it's when it's eerie and unsettling, it's also beautiful in this kind of like new music way. Maybe that's part of why I like it so much, is that it taps into this contemporary composition, new music world that was like a big part of my kind of musical awakening. Here's one of my favorite haunting bits, the choral thing at the end of The Blossoms of Your Tomorrow Shall Unfold in My Heart.
Beckoning the fall of annihilation, and because it does not have an essence, it will cease and be no more. It will cease and be no more. It does not have an essence. It will cease and be no more.
And then here's one of my favorite heavy parts from the start of The Barren Earth Oozes Blood and Shakes and Moans to Drink Her Children's Gore. And at last, for me, There was no greater album, no greater artistic statement this year than Puron's Exhaust. The album maybe inches just slightly towards being a bit more parsable than previous Puron stuff. Like, there's some honest-to-goodness catchy riffs on here, some real bangers. And it just hits so hard because of that. Like, don't worry, it's still Puron. It still has all these impossible changes on a dime and sections that leave the usual laws of music far behind. But this just, like, little bit more repetitiveness, whatever, I don't know, I think it really clicks. But really the main thing, I think, most importantly, is that it's rare that an album captures the spirit of a time and place so perfectly. In this case, the spirit of being in New York City during a year that really feels like end times. I also had an out-of-body experience seeing them play after midnight in a dungeon last month, where everything just like gelled and kind of melted, and that's often a very important part of me picking a favorite album. Let's hope it's not actually end times, because I've got some more videos planned for the new year. See ya.